Hey everyone, welcome to US Daily Beat. It's Wednesday, August 19th, 2026, and I'm so glad you're here. We've got some really interesting stories for you today. Israel confirms soldiers fired at car in which Hind Rajab was killed, and opens. Sacked Ukrainian defense minister calls for presidential election. Inflation is heating up, but don't expect another crisis. But real quick before we dive in, if you'd like to support the channel, go ahead and subscribe and give this video a like. It genuinely means the world to us, and it's what keeps this show going every single day. All right, with that said, let's get into it. So first up today, we're looking at world news. A painful and deeply human story out of Gaza is now getting a new layer of scrutiny. Israel says its soldiers fired at the car in which 5-year-old Hind Rajab was later found dead, and it's opened a criminal investigation into what happened. That matters, because for months, this case has stood out as one of the most heartbreaking from the war. Here's the background. Hind was in a car with relatives when it came under fire. She initially survived and, according to earlier reports, pleaded for help during desperate phone calls that spread widely online and around the world. But when rescuers finally reached the area, they found her body along with the bodies of 6 family members. For anyone following the war in Gaza, this story hits so hard because it puts a single child's final moments at the center of a much larger conflict. It also raises the same urgent questions we keep seeing. What happened on the ground? Who made the decisions? And can the truth be established in a war zone where access is so limited? What to watch next is whether this investigation leads to any accountability, and whether it gives families and observers any clearer picture of how this tragedy unfolded. Next up, we've got a story from World News. Ukraine's political scene just got a little more complicated. The country's former defense minister, who was recently removed from his post, is now publicly calling for a presidential election. That's getting attention because, under normal circumstances, this would be a straightforward democratic demand. But Ukraine is not under normal circumstances right now. Since February 2022, Ukraine has been under martial law because of the full-scale Russian invasion. And under that emergency system, elections are suspended. The idea is pretty simple. When a country is fighting for survival, leaders and lawmakers have said it's not practical or even safe to run a national vote. So this push raises a big question. How do you balance democracy with wartime reality? For you and me watching from the outside, this matters because it touches on something bigger than one politician's career. It gets at how Ukraine governs itself while still under attack, and whether pressure for elections could become a new political flashpoint. The key thing to watch next is whether this is just one man making a statement, or whether it signals growing debate inside Ukraine about what comes after martial law. Okay, moving on to business and finance. If your grocery bill or energy costs have felt a little heavier lately, you're not imagining it. Inflation is picking back up, which means the prices of everyday things are rising faster again, and that can squeeze household budgets pretty quickly. The big picture here is that this is creating pressure on Burnham, especially because voters tend to notice rising living costs long before they notice any economic charts or policy debates. Now, this doesn't look like the kind of runaway inflation crisis people remember from worse periods. That's an important distinction. We're not talking about a sudden economic meltdown, but we are talking about a renewed cost of living headache. And those are politically dangerous because they hit people in very direct personal ways. When rent, food, transport, and bills all edge up at once, it changes how secure people feel. What happens next depends a lot on the coming months. If inflation keeps climbing, the pressure grows. If it eases, the concern may fade. So this is one to watch closely because even when it's not a full-blown crisis, inflation can still shape the mood of the country and the choices families make every week. Okay, moving on to business and finance. If your energy bill feels a little heavier lately, you're not imagining it. Inflation in the UK has climbed to 2.9%, which is the highest level in 4 months. Economists had pretty much expected this move, but it still matters because it tells us prices are rising a bit faster again, and that can put pressure on household budgets. A big driver here is energy, and that's where the wider global picture comes in. Chancellor John Healey said the Iran war continues to impact prices here at home, which is a reminder that events far beyond the UK can still show up in our monthly bills. When energy costs rise, they can feed into transport, food, and just about everything else we buy. For you and me, the key question is whether this is a short-term bump or the start of another stubborn stretch of higher prices. The Bank of England will be watching closely because inflation trends can shape interest rate decisions, mortgage costs, and borrowing more broadly. So even if this number wasn't a surprise, it's one to keep an eye on. Okay, moving on to technology. If you've bought, sold, or even just casually dabbled in crypto, this one is worth paying attention to. In the UK, HMRC has sent out about 81,000 warning letters to people it believes may not have fully reported their crypto taxes according to a Freedom of Information request. And that number has nearly tripled compared with 2024, which tells us the tax office is clearly getting more aggressive about tracking digital assets. The big picture here is that crypto isn't sitting outside the tax system just because it lives on an app or a blockchain. In many cases, profits from selling or swapping digital assets can be taxable, and HMRC has been making it increasingly clear that it expects people to keep records and report correctly. So why should we care? Because this is a sign that governments are getting much better at matching up exchange data, wallet activity, and tax filings. If you've got crypto holdings, it's a good time to double-check your paperwork, not assume it's flying under the radar. And if you're new to the space, this is another reminder that "I didn't know" probably won't be a great defense later. All right, so in technology, if you tried to pay with your Monzo card or move money earlier today and something didn't go through, you weren't imagining it. The digital bank says a problem briefly affected card payments and transfers, but that it's now been fixed and all services are back up and running. For anyone who uses Monzo as their main everyday bank, even a short outage can feel pretty disruptive. These kinds of apps have become the place we do everything from splitting a dinner bill to sending rent money, so when they wobble, it's not just annoying, it can mess with real plans in real time. And because so many people rely on mobile banking now, even a temporary issue can ripple out fast. Monzo hasn't said much yet about what caused the disruption, but the important part for users is that things should be working again. Still, if you were affected, it's worth checking your account, any pending payments, and whether transfers eventually completed. And as always with bank outages, the bigger question is whether this was a one-off blip or a sign of pressure on increasingly digital financial systems. And finally today, something from politics. With Christmas approaching, Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham is putting forward a plan aimed at getting rough sleepers off the streets and into housing across England. The idea is being compared to the Everyone In effort from the pandemic, when councils and charities work together to move thousands of people indoors quickly. That program was widely praised because it showed what can happen when there's real urgency and coordination. What's important here is that this isn't just about a cold night or a holiday gesture. For people sleeping rough, winter can be dangerous, and the Christmas period can be especially tough when services are stretched and support networks are thinner. So, if this plan moves forward, we could see a renewed push to use emergency accommodation and broader housing support to reach people who are still living on the streets. For you and me, the big thing to watch is whether this becomes more than a one-off seasonal promise. The real test is whether local authorities get the funding, space, and political backing to make it work. And if it does, it could shape the wider debate about homelessness policy going into the new year. And that's it for today's US Daily Beat. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here. And listen, if you'd like to support the channel and help us keep going, please do subscribe and give this video a like. It truly makes all the difference. Turn on notifications too, so you never miss tomorrow's episode. I'll be back with more news in the morning. Until then, take care, and I'll see you tomorrow.